You're listening to Runions Have Layers, the podcast where two siblings explore the many layers of life and mental wellness, where vulnerability meets strength and where every shared story is a step towards self-discovery. Join us as we uncover the richness of our experiences and find empowerment in every layer.
Welcome back. So today we're going to be talking about body image and self-esteem, and it's a very personal subject for anybody, but we're going to try to explore some of what body image is and what the societal expectations have been put onto us through historical context and cultural perspectives, and what the norms are that have been established and how we can change those and to see ourselves in a more, not only a positive light, but a more accepting light, and that we can be more happy and just love ourselves a little bit more. So the first thing I want to talk about is what the definition of body image is. This definition is from the Psychology Today's website, and it says body image is the mental representation an individual creates of themselves, but it may or may not bear any relation to how one actually appears. And I think it's important to note that it's the way that we see ourselves, like in our mind. You know, we look at ourselves in the mirror and we are constantly taking in data from the world and processing it, and we're creating this representation of the things that we see around us, and our own image is it's like no different than anything else that we see. It's just data that we're bringing in, but we're processing it and we're seeing ourselves in this specific way because of how we think of ourselves or the things that we've heard, things that we've seen, and we can kind of change how we see ourselves in a way. Not that we're going to change the way that we look completely to where we go from looking one way to like, oh, this is like how I want to look, because that's, it's not reality. But keeping in mind that is a very subjective mental image, and that the way that we see ourselves isn't how everyone else sees us. Other people are like, oh no, you're so beautiful, or you're so handsome, or you're so talented, or so smart, whatever that adjective is. And then we might see ourselves of like, no, I'm so stupid, or I'm fat, or I need to like do this or do that, because we're so hard on ourselves.
One of the most interesting things that I have come to realize is that I hated my body for so long, and I didn't even know why. I didn't even know why that was in my mind or that's how I felt. It was something that was so ingrained in me from childhood. There was some specific instances that happened, but I didn't ever question the narrative around me. I just came to accept that that is what was truth. What I saw in the media was truth, or what people said about me was truth. And it took a really long time to unpack that and realize that I can create my own image of myself in my mind, and it can be a positive one. And that doesn't mean that, I look in the mirror every single time and, oh, I love that. But I've come to appreciate myself and think of myself in a much different way. And so I kind of want to talk about a little bit of that today to help people maybe rethink how they're thinking about themselves, or at least look at it from a more objective lens.
Like I was saying before, our brains can distort the visual information that it's receiving. So when we look at ourselves in the mirror and we see ourselves, or it's a photo or whatever, we are seeing ourselves in a specific way. And a lot of times that is influenced by social comparison, things that are on social media, things that we see in the movies, how Hollywood or how people who are creating content decide how that wants to be created, and the style of it and everything. And I'm a photographer, so I understand that you can edit an image and you can manipulate it in a way that you want to make it look a certain way. You want to have a certain lighting, mood, and shape, and the contour of things. You can go pretty far in making something look a certain way. And I've seen a lot of videos on YouTube where people are like shaping and editing models and stuff like that, and it's sort of like a reverse, and you see what the original is versus what they actually published, and it's kind of crazy that you can do that. But that a lot of times creates body dysmorphia for a lot of people, which is, seeing yourself and it being different than what you actually look like, and feeling like you are, maybe more overweight than you are, or you just see yourself in a worse way, I guess.
I have definitely experienced that and still do. I'm not sitting here saying like everything is roses for me, because it's still something that I have to navigate on a daily basis. But yes, I in all of my past relationships, not the one I'm currently in, but every single one before that, I would always have been told, like, you look great, you're beautiful, whatever. And I thought that they were lying to me. And it created a lot of friction. And it was based on my own image of myself and what I saw. And that's exactly true. I would look in the mirror and I would see all of the imperfections, the cellulite, the belly, all of these things that are natural and beautiful on us. And I would hate them and try and change them. And this went all the way back really to high school. I look back at pictures now and I wasn't that big, but all of my friends were really, really skinny. So I felt like the bigger one. And even, about 10 years ago, like my weight has fluctuated a bunch in my life with, all the yo-yo dieting and all of that stuff. I mean, I was 100 pounds lighter than I am now. And I thought that I was fat. I had a really bad body image, even at my lightest weight ever. I think about, I wonder why, because according to standards, my body looked exactly like I wanted it to, or exactly how society deemed acceptable, but I still hated myself. And that's because of the mental image, not just the image of myself, but how I felt about my body. It really is a struggle because it's like you feel like the way you're feeling and you're fighting against what society is telling you is acceptable. And I just kind of wanted to open the conversation and start to break down those barriers and maybe, help people to think about this in just a little bit different way.
Yeah, I think that shame is connected to this as well. And even though you might have been at the actual, the standard of what was being created in society, that you still had that shame of like not feeling good enough. And it's like, even though you were there, you still were like, no, I can be better. I can look better than what I do. Shame is such a powerful emotion and it really can hold on really tight. And it's really hard to break the grip of the shame because it does come from years and years and years of things that you experience and that you have been told and what you're hearing from childhood. We've talked a lot about things in previous episodes and this one about things that come from our childhood. And that's a really important thing to constantly be thinking about and uncovering and trying to unearth all those things that are really affecting a lot of all the things that we're dealing with in life.
Yeah, definitely. Because if you think about the messages that you were receiving, let's just, for example, go all the way back to childhood, the people around me, and of course it was in the 90s and it was like heroin chic was, in. All of the people around me were either on diets or they were talking about diets or they were talking about bodies. Like that was the message that I was constantly receiving, whether it was intended or not. I don't think any of these people realized what they were doing to me as with a young mind that was learning to love myself and learning about the world. But what I saw modeled to me in a lot of different areas in my life around different people was that thin was good and fat was bad. And that is a lot of how society views things. But I grew up thinking that. So I didn't really have any other messages in my life. And even our dad was a big person and he, I think, seemed pretty happy with himself. But it's like I didn't ever hear that coming from him. I don't know about you. And that wasn't anything that we really talked about as a family anyway.
I do remember growing up and thinking that I didn't want to be as big as dad was, though. Like I remember many times thinking that I wanted to be more healthy and I wanted to be more active and I didn't want to deal with that because I saw how it impeded a lot of the things he wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I remember I was young, I was probably 10 or 11. And at that time, I think he must have been, 40 or 41, because he's 35 years older than I am. So 45. And we were going outside to play catch with a baseball and he just had such a hard time doing that. And I mean, he was probably tired and whatever, but he was 45. He's not that old, And I just remember that he struggled with it. And I remember thinking like, man, I don't want to be like this when I'm his age. And so for me, like that's kind of what I I thought of, but you're right. Like we didn't actually ever talk about it. It wasn't explicit of like be healthier, at least not for me. If it did, it was like don't be like us, make better choices kind of thing. But it wasn't very specific at all.
Well, we did get a lot of the don't drink and don't smoke and don't do drugs. And in that way, that was encouraging us to be healthy, but it was for a different motivation.
Yeah, I think that was more about religion and following Jesus. And
one of the things that, I realized growing up when I was starting to raise my kids and be mindful about how I talk in front of them about myself is that, and I don't mean this just in our home, I mean, in general, we were not taught that bodies come in all shapes and sizes. It was like, this is the standard that you need to meet. And if you do, then you're good enough. But if you're anything other than that, it's not, and it's like, so I grew up thinking I had to be like this really thin model type body, and my body's just more curvy than that. Like I have been skinny at some times, but I still had curve to it and I still had bulges, and like I've never been model thin, but that wasn't anything that I grew up knowing or realizing or telling myself in my head. I always thought I wasn't good enough because I wasn't as thin or as pretty or as have clear enough skin or whatever, as the models in the magazines, which are fake anyway. But, that was my standard.
That probably comes from, like the societal expectations and being good enough for a man to want to marry you and have kids and get a house. And like, that's a very old school kind of way of thinking, but our parents are baby boomers. And so like, that is the motivation. And that was probably the messaging that you got. Cause I think I remember you mentioning this a few episodes ago. And, you get this specific messaging of, you have to look good enough. You have to be desirable enough for a man to want to marry you. And that's just not the way the world works. Like you don't have to have that in order to be successful or to be happy. What do you say about that?
The way that it manifested specifically for me was I felt like I had to do things in a specific order, get married, have kids, be a housewife, or, whatever came after that. When I first got married, I was really young. And I remember thinking like, I better do it now because this is my last chance before I get old and gain a bunch of weight and become an old maid. It's like, that was the messaging in my head. Instead of being so excited about, yay, I'm getting married. It was like, I better do it now before it's too late. And, I look back and I'm like, that's just really sad. It is really sad. I mean, I can't go back and change it, but that's one of the reasons why I have encouraged my kids in different ways. I'm not encouraging them to be unhealthy, but when they have mentioned things about criticizing themselves or losing weight or, then I open up the conversation about bodies, and all bodies are good bodies, and bodies come in all shapes and sizes, and you don't have to meet the specific standard. And wanting to be healthy is one thing, but the size of your body doesn't necessarily correlate with your health. It can. I mean, by all standards, I'm considered obese and all of my blood work and everything is perfectly normal. And yes, that's just me, but you will find that in other people as well. And a lot of that has to do with genetics. And, there's a lot of other things that go into that, but it's like people automatically equate large bodies with being unhealthy. And that's just not the case.
Yeah. I've met several people who are skinny and have exercise and do all that stuff, but they have diabetes. Type 1 diabetes, or some have type 2 diabetes. So I think there's a lot of external factors that are out of our control, like genetics and where we are located in the world, water sources and different supply chains and whatever. And so I think that there's a lot of things that are kind of baked in that we have to deal with from time to time that we just can't change. But there's a lot of things that we can change. And like Holly's saying, just because you're a larger size or you're overweight or whatever, call it whatever you want. Even if you are in shape and you feel like you're in shape, that doesn't necessarily mean one thing or the other thing. And that those two things can exist at the same time and they can both be healthy. They don't have to be one or the other. And I think the way that we define it and the way that we, let that influence how we see ourselves is really what we're talking about, is that the way that society and that science and history has talked to us and told us that this thing is bad and this thing is good really has distorted how we see ourselves. And I think that is changing a lot. social media does negatively impact body image, but I also think that it really helps because it gives a lot more perspective, a lot more education. It gives people an opportunity, like we're doing right now, to discuss some of these hard topics and to, break them down a little bit and give our perspective and our opinion on it. And a lot of other people are doing that. And even, brands like Levi have campaigns that are dedicated to different body types that are not one specific like they used to be. And I've seen more and more brands do that to where they're starting to bring in more models that are different sizes that represent everyone and different colors and even people that have disabilities. So I've seen that a lot more. So I think there's a lot more acceptance and people that are challenging the norms more than they used to, especially 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that nowadays with, body inclusivity being popular or more, things that people are realizing that it's necessary, not that it's just popular. But, it used to be that a size 8 or size 10 in a woman was considered, a plus size model. And nowadays, if companies are not size inclusive, they get canceled. So it's like the script has flipped completely, and there's a whole different way that people are looking at things. I think that's amazing for the younger generation.
If we had this kind of inclusivity when we were growing up and we had social media, I mean, I think there's positives and negatives to both sides, but I think that having the inclusivity and seeing people on a screen that look like us, I feel like that can positively influence the way that we grow up in society and that we see ourselves. And so I think that's really important because, the flip side of that is seeing only one kind of person constantly. And if you don't look like that, I mean, I've definitely struggled with that. You see models or you see actors and they usually look really nice. They look really good. They're fit. They're really attractive. Even like in movies for a long time, it was like, of course, the male and the female lead, they're both attractive and don't look like anyone else around me and not like I look. So, you aspire to want to be that kind of person, to look like that. And when you don't achieve it, it can really affect you negatively. And that's just a hard thing to overcome. So I think that's really good that people are starting to include people of all shapes and sizes and races.
One more thing I want to mention real quickly before we move on is that the cultural and historical perspective for body image and what is acceptable and what looks good comes from a racist and sexist view. The BMI was created by, a white male standard. It was informed by a white physician. And so women in general, but specifically any women of color, were not taken into consideration in the creation of that as well. And the acceptable body image or body standards has changed throughout the years. I went back and looked, till the 1920s, and all of the things that were in or that were popular has changed so much.
I mean, all of it was definitely informed by like a white male standard. And I think that's pretty much everything, because the way that culture and history was essentially written is by white males because they were the ones who had the rights. They were the ones who could get education. They were the ones that could own property. They were the ones that could have a job and make money. And those are all things that propel ideas forward. And so, of course, this was definitely established by a white male, and everything subsequent to that was also established by a white male. And it affects, I think, society at large, but in this specific context, there's even more than just BMI that has been established by that perspective.
Absolutely. I mean, capitalism in general, if you think about the diet industry, it's a multi-million, probably billion-dollar industry. And if diets worked, there wouldn't be a million diets to go on. And, going back to talking about social media and its influence, I do want to mention that, the positive influence that it's had on me, not only following people that look like me or that are champions of the body positivity movement is learning about intuitive eating. And that really started to change the way that I thought about food and nourishing my body instead of just feeding it just to eat. And also a lot of the embodiment of different kinds of movement like yoga and things like that have really helped me to appreciate my body and love my body.
What exactly is body intuitive eating? I've never heard that term before.
Yeah, so intuitive eating essentially is just trusting your body to make the choices for you that feel good without judging yourself, without shaming yourself, without the influence of diet culture. And my experience, I know this is true for other people as well, but specifically for me, one of the things that I have always binged on is gummy bears. A lot of different kinds of candy, but I would just, if it was there, I would eat the whole bag. And part of the premise of intuitive eating is eating what you want without judging yourself. And what I found is the more available that stuff was to me, the less I craved it and the less that I wanted to eat it. And that's true, because if your body thinks that, oh, the cookies are scarce, or I better eat them while they're in the house, or I better eat them now before I eat them all up, or eat a couple and throw them away, that kind of thinking, if they're always available to you. And I went through a time period, like I said, where I did binge the entire bag, and it wasn't good, but it's because my body was learning what I needed at the time.
Listening to your body, I think, is important. Everything in moderation, right? Like, I think that as I've learned more about food and being healthy and all the things that we've been talking about over the last few weeks and today, is that you have to let yourself live life and be happy. And there's a balance to that. Yeah, you can eat poorly on certain things, but you also have to balance that out with other things. And it can't be too hard on yourself, because I've definitely been so hard where it's like, no, I can't eat this. I'm just going to restrict everything, and I have to work out, and I have to do this and do that. And then life is a little miserable. Like, you're not really happy. You feel like you're working towards something that you're never going to get to. And you never get there, and you're like, I'm doing all this work, but I don't see any results, or I'm not getting the results that I want. And so you end up just going the complete opposite. And you're like, well, fuck it. I'm not going to even care about it anymore. And I'm going to go 180, and I'm just going to do whatever I want. And I'm going to just be lazy, and I'm not going to work out, and I'm not going to do this, or I'm going to eat ice cream every day, whatever. So I think it's really important, and something that I really had to focus on is finding a balance and eating ice cream when I want to, but also finding the times where I restrict myself sometimes. And I'm like, I really want to, but I had ice cream 3 days in a row this week, so maybe I'm going to skip today.
Well, restriction is definitely not part of intuitive eating at all. And one of the things that helped me so much with intuitive eating is food does not have a morality. There's no good food. There's no bad food. Food is food. Now, there's food that's more helpful to your body, that is more nutritional for you to eat. But taking away the morality of sugar is bad or fat is bad or carbs are bad. Yes, like you said, there's a balance. And unless under doctor's orders, I stopped restricting anything. And it takes a while to balance, because I did go to the opposite end and gain a bunch of weight, which, couldn't have been healthy in certain ways. I mean, my cholesterol started to rise, but nothing else was really out of balance except how I felt. And so that has helped me. Now, I say that to say that, for example, the ice cream, it doesn't make it bad, and it doesn't make you bad for eating it, even if you had it 2 other days in a row. And that's where you kind of have to get through that part of the process to where you're listening to your body and your body's telling you to stop. Let me use myself as an example. I restricted myself for so long that I kind of went in the opposite direction. And now I'm coming back to my normal homeostasis. And that can be difficult to accept what you're seeing in the mirror. It can be difficult emotionally. It can be difficult mentally, because it is a mental image of what we see. And it's not as easy as just dropping 50 pounds, because like we talked about, even when you drop those 50 pounds, you still are considering yourself in the same way, and you still are not loving yourself to support that. And so, you can look in the mirror and see that you dropped all this weight and still criticize all of the imperfections and all the flaws on your body.
It's so easy to attach a morality to food. And I feel like a lot of morality, quote unquote, is all attached to religion. And so I think this constant good or bad, angel, devil sort of conversation that enters into a lot of topics in even everyday language and life, I constantly bring it back to that because I think that's really where it started. But that's a side note and another topic, but I just want to mention that just eating and enjoying it is what I'm hearing you say, that like if there's something you want to eat, you eat it and you enjoy it and you don't judge yourself for it. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
And letting yourself just exist and not giving yourself a hard time about it.
One other thing I want to mention real quick is what a lot of people thinking is healthy eating is actually disordered eating behavior. And I had no idea until I found out about intuitive eating.
I want to go back a little bit because you mentioned yoga and how that has been a positive part of your journey through this. And one thing I really love about yoga, I don't do yoga that much. I do it probably once a week or so. But one thing I love about yoga and specifically yoga classes is that the instructors usually bring up in some way or another that this is everyone's specific journey, that you're not comparing yourself to other people, that it's a practice and everyone is in they're on their own journey and everyone's body's different. Everyone has different flexibility. Everyone has different strength. Everyone has different sizes and we can all do certain things because that's what our body allows us to do. And it's about listening to your body and just letting yourself be okay with where it is. And that's why yoga is called a practice, is because it's something that you're constantly working towards and that you're constantly practicing. And as you continue to do that, you get better. So I just want to bring that up and mention it because I think it's a really poignant point that similar to body image in that we all have different sizes and we're all in different places in life, that yoga really helps to support that and to give yourself a little bit of grace. Is that, yeah, just like you're in yoga and you're practicing and you may not be as flexible as the person next to you, you're showing up and you're working and you're trying to be better. You know, as you get older, your body changes and your metabolism changes and your body is just different. It looks different. And, you know, being a grown adult versus a teenager are very different. And I think what I struggled with was I saw people that were adults that were still really fit and athletic and I wasn't. And I was like, why can't I be like that? Why can't I, be the adult that can look healthy? And I said before, a lot of this has to go into external factors. And I had to really understand that and let myself be okay with the fact that I don't have the genetics of people who look athletic or that can eat whatever they want, but they have their own challenges physically. Then I'm sure they have their own body image issues that they deal with that are different than mine. So understanding and acknowledging that I am not a teenager or a kid anymore, that I am like a grown adult and I have essentially a different body type now. That was something I had to realize for myself and I had to start letting myself be okay with. I think I still deal with that sometimes, but I feel like I've overcome most of that to where I feel okay with the body that I'm in now. But there's still moments where I still kind of look at myself and I'm like, oh, like I need to lose some weight or I want to be healthy or whatever. And I mean, I'm always trying to be healthier. I think it's important to be healthy. But thinking of what you're saying about the intuitive eating, I'd never heard of that before. So I think I'll probably think more about that now and just be more aware of how I see things and questioning how I'm influenced by society and what messaging I'm getting, because it comes from everywhere.
Yeah. I also want to mention that something that I learned that I had no idea about, and I'm guessing that there's probably a lot of people that also don't realize it, is how much stress affects our weight because of the cortisol that's released. And I don't just mean external stressors like work and family, and although that is valid and accurate, but grief and trauma puts us in survival mode. And so for me, I was in survival mode for over 30 years and I didn't even realize it. And that alone, I'm not saying, I was overweight because of that, but that wasn't a factor. Hormones being messed up can be a factor with different, with thyroid, PCOS, menopause when women get older. Chronic illness has a lot to do with that. And it's like, those are things that, at least in my narrative growing up, was never taken into consideration. I mean, I remember
Yeah.
hearing about thyroid issues, but all of the other stuff, we're learning more and more about survival mode and how our nervous system gets dysregulated and the effects of that on the body. And that's something that hasn't really been included in the narrative really until recently.
Yeah, I agree. There's been a lot more science and a lot more messaging around like inclusivity and a lot of the other peripheral impacts and things that influence us in terms of body image. And probably within the last, I don't know, we say 5 years or so, it feels like there's been a big leap towards inclusivity in body image and things like that. And I feel like a lot of that has come out of a lot of the LGBTQ movement and the BIPOC movement and Black Lives Matter. I feel like a lot of that has pioneered a lot of the inclusive piece of it. It's definitely a large piece of it that I feel like has permeated sort of into being more transparent and more open and accepting of a lot of different body types, that anybody can look like anything and that should be accepted regardless of who you are, what your background is, where you come from, how you identify. And so I feel like in the last 5 years or maybe 10 that there's been a lot more like acceptance of that.
Mm-hmm. And I agree. I think that it's more than just acceptance. It's also about celebrating individuality and your uniqueness in the same way, like also accepting that there are different body types, but also celebrating that.
Yeah. Having some self-compassion is really important. You mentioned before, it's not going to be easy and it's not going to be as simple as losing 50 pounds or as simple as, stopping your consumption of specific things or stopping smoking or whatever. There's not a simple, easy fix. And it's not about fixing, actually. It's about accepting, and it's about, like you said, celebrating who we are as a person. And we're more than just the way that we look. There's so much more about us, the thoughts that we have, the talents that we have, the things that we like to do. And the way we look is only a piece of who we are as a person. And so having some self-compassion and treating yourself with kindness and understanding that you're human and that you might make mistakes and you might not do the things that you want to do, but having this intuitive eating thing, I think could be potentially helpful for someone. So, we're not mean to other people whenever they eat ice cream or they don't exercise. I mean, some people might be assholes about it, but I think in general, most people don't give a shit. It's your life. Do with it what you want. And so I think taking that point of view of our own selves and just being happy and living life the way that we want to, because essentially, we have to be happy. We want to be happy and live life and enjoy it.
Yeah, people don't think about us nearly as much as we think they are. People aren't looking at what I'm eating. And if they are judging me, I mean, who cares? Like, yeah, I mean, I'm at that place now. I didn't used to be. But I also want to talk about some alternative approaches, or at least one to body positivity and loving yourself. If you can't get to that place, there's something that is called body neutrality. And that's really where I had to start. And it's accepting your body without judging it and appreciating its functionality. So for example, for myself, there was things that, it got through, it brought me through some trauma. It brought me through disordered eating. It brought me through having a couple of children, and I started to appreciate all that my body has done for me. And that took a long time. And so getting from there to loving myself was a journey. And I am still not all the way there at all, but I have made significant progress.
It'll probably be a lifelong journey, honestly, because you're still going to go through things. Your body will still encounter things, and you have to, tackle those as they come to you. And me too. I think everyone will. I don't think that a lot of the things that we talk about are not things that are going to be done and over with. They're constant things in life that we're always approaching and that we're having to deal with. And the way that we respond to them is what's the most important, and giving ourselves a little bit of compassion and not judging ourselves is really, I think, what helps me with body image, is removing the judgment from it and just seeing it how it is and just being okay with that.
Yeah. And a little bit of introspection too, because anytime that I want to intentionally lose weight, or anytime I would want to intentionally edit a photo to look smaller, I ask myself, why? What is the motivation behind this? Because, I'm surrounded by people that love me. I'm happy. I get enough food. Like I do all these things and I'm like, okay, so what is the motivation? Why do I want to look thinner? And it's always because of what society expects me to look like. So that when I say I still struggle, it's exactly that. Not last year, but the year before, I went to a weight loss clinic and got a weight loss medicine. And it didn't do anything for me, but it was, I had to kind of step back and be like, why am I doing this? Why? And I think that that's important to always consider when you're taking an action, is where's the motivation? What messaging did you receive that made you think that way and feel that way? And is that true still today?
Yeah. So you talked about body positivity, and I think that it's easy for people to go to the extreme of being negative about yourself, and then on the other side of the spectrum, being positive about everything. And I think that can also be harmful in some ways too, because if we're just constantly positive about everything, it starts to feel inauthentic and like forced in a way.
Yeah, I think that's definitely accurate. It's one of those things that you can't just ignore how you're feeling and cover it with a bunch of toxic positivity or affirmations. I mean, that is part of it, because you have to rewire your brain and change the way that you see things and think about things. But it's not just about automatically saying, oh, I love myself, or I love my body shape, or I'm so beautiful, or, it's not just about that. It's about changing the mentality behind it first. And there's this saying I heard, it reminds me of this, is if you don't deal with the real emotions, it's like putting whipped cream on a pile of trash and calling it dessert. And that's exactly what it is. You have to go deeper and find the reasons why, and all the old tapes that are playing, and then replace those with the positive, neutral thoughts. If you can't get to the positive part yet, if you still are really struggling with, self-loathing, self-hatred, and, those kinds of things, start with appreciating the body's functionality. And then, baby steps toward there. And you may not get there for a really long time, but eventually it'll get easier and easier.
Yeah, and social media really contributes to, I think, both sides, the negative and the positive. And so, again, finding a balance, I think, is really important. And if you find that social media is not helping you, maybe you need to acknowledge that and identify that. And maybe you need to unfollow certain pages. Maybe you need to limit how much you're on social media. So identifying and being self-aware of that is a part of this process, especially because social media impacts how we see ourselves so much, because we see so many accounts that, they might look like a way that we want to look, or they're doing something that we want to be doing that we can't be. And for me, this is like traveling. I love to travel, and I'm constantly seeing people traveling different places, and it makes me kind of question what I'm doing with my life, because I see people doing things that I want to be doing. And so you have to identify those things and take the appropriate action so that you're giving yourself some of that balance. So to end out this episode today, we want to talk about some of the myths that are associated with body image and kind of debunk some of them. The first one is that bigger is unhealthy and exercise is for weight loss. And we talked about this earlier, but all bodies are good, and it doesn't matter what your size is, that you can be small and be unhealthy. You can be big and you can be healthy. So I don't think there's a direct correlation necessarily to what size you are and what your health is. And you can exercise for all kinds of reasons. And people, for myself included, I exercise because I want to be healthy. I don't do it with a motivation to lose weight. I do it because I just want to be active and I want to be moving.
Another myth is that it's okay for doctors to body shame you. If that's happening, find yourself another doctor. I have gone to multiple doctors that are coming more toward the body acceptance, body positivity and they don't even weigh me anymore. The only time that they ask my weight is if it has to do with the medication. And I know that's not accurate across the board for all doctors and all practices, but that has been my experience so far.
Another myth is how we see ourselves is exactly how others see me. And it's what we said before is that like it's a very subjective mental image that we're creating of ourselves. And the way that we see ourselves is not always aligned with how others see us. So understanding that the way that we see ourselves might be a little different. And most people like aren't going to really care very much because they're concerned with their own things in their own life and their own body image. So not really giving too much value in how others see you is an important thing to remember.
Yeah, we understand that this is a nuanced topic and it can be difficult sometimes, but we want to encourage you to cultivate compassion for yourself over judgment. Consider the way you speak to yourself versus the way you would speak to a friend, and find things that bring you happiness beyond your appearance and beyond what you look like. And celebrate your body because it's unique, and celebrate the journey that you're making toward acceptance and more body positivity.
Thank you for joining us and peeling back the layers today. If you enjoyed this podcast and you'd like to support it, please share it with others and please leave a review, like, subscribe, all that jazz. For more information about us, you can visit runionshavelayers.com, where you can find how to get connected with us and find resources mentioned in our episodes. Bye for now.